Well, welcome to this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Good. My guests for this episode are Karin Hurt and David Dye, who are the founders of Let's Grow Leaders, a global leadership development firm known for practical tools and leadership development that sticks. They are also the author of several award-winning and best-selling books, including Courageous Cultures, How to Build Teams of Micro-Innovators, Problem Solvers, and Customer Advocates, and their brand new book, Powerful Phrases for Dealing with Workplace Conflict. In this episode, Karin and David delve into the complexities that many struggle with around conflict, unraveling the four dimensions of constructive conflict. They also offer proven phrases that will turn your challenging conversations into opportunities for growth and understanding. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we engage with esteemed thought leaders and explore research-backed strategies and techniques that empower leaders at every level to achieve meaningful results that drive lasting change. Welcome again to the program, Karin and David.
Charles, thank you so much for having us. Really look forward to this conversation.
So good to be back.
Great. Well, let's start with why is conflict so hard? And the problem you state, which I agree with, is it's in your head and you make conflict into something that's a life or death thing. You over exaggerate it or catastrophize it.
You know, it's as you asked that question, Charles, I'm taken back to shortly after the pandemic had receded, the World Economic Forum did their own research, and they identified the ability to deal with workplace conflict as the number one skill for the foreseeable future in the global workplace, which I just thought was fascinating, and just speaks to the importance of this topic and why these skills are needed so much. And when you talk about why it's hard and what makes it challenging, I mean, there's so much hard wiring that we have. We're social creatures. So many of us, we don't want to be rejected or feel cut off from the group or have that social isolation and worry about damaging relationships. And those kinds of fears and the stories we tell ourselves about those things, they seem very, very real. And then you've got the threats that you can have the same rush of adrenaline from a little bit of a disagreement with somebody as you do if there's a tiger getting ready to leap out of a bush at you. And so helping your body be able to distinguish between those two things is critical, because without any of the work, our body just reacts to it all the same. And so giving ourselves the ability to deal with it in a more productive way is really what this is all about.
When you cite research in the book that 70% of people from your research say they're experiencing the same or more conflict at work, that's disheartening. And then the other 30% to think, okay, well, maybe it's 30% are okay. The primary reasons they're experiencing less conflict is because they've changed jobs or working from home or just escaped challenging people.
Yeah. And what's lost in that, and why that second half of that is concerning. I mean, yeah, 70% experiencing more or the same that's concerning, but that half of the folks who say less, it's because they escaped. What's lost in that? And this is important when we're talking about workplace conflict. Workplace conflict is not automatically bad. We so often assume it is because we think of the destructive kind that damages dignity, relationships, and all that sort of thing. But productive conflict, collaboration, creates better results. There's more creativity. You get ingenuity, solutions you wouldn't have come up with otherwise. All of those things can get a more productive, more enjoyable workplace and work experience. But all that's lost if it's just a matter of escaping. And so while it might feel better for that individual, it's not really a overall great outcome.
Yeah, and I think we're see what we really saw a lot of when the qualitative comments was a whole new set of what we call conflict cocktails emerging, right? So, we have the complexities of really exhausted workers in a uncertain economy, and then you've got customers who are really sick and tired of long wait times and tip creep and all this stuff. So, you've got that kind of conflict. You've got people who are feeling lonely and isolated, many still suffering from residual mental health challenges that, exasperated by the pandemic. And now they're working in remote teams. And so they're feeling isolated and also disconnected. And yet at the same time, they're like, but I don't miss the commute. So I don't want to. And so there's just this complex, how do we do things around here? and a lot of lack of clarity of expectations in these remote teams. Are we going to have our cameras on or off during our meetings? When I say you can work from anywhere, do I really mean work from anywhere, or is the petting zoo okay or not okay? Right. So it's those kinds of things that we're seeing create. So you had all your regular conflict that's been going on for years. And now you've got this whole new breed of conflict cocktails that is coming in. And I think that is part of what's leading to the more conflict as well.
When I hear this from leaders a lot, that they would like a script to follow because it's so difficult to have these conversations. They don't want to bumble in their words, not say the right thing. But you mentioned, which I think is very astute, is that there are no perfect words for every situation, except maybe thank you and I apologize. And apart from those, it's what the words do that matter most, not the words themselves.
Yeah, that's such an important distinction, Charles. And we did really work hard to craft these words because, as you say, and we hear this all the time from our clients too, which is one of the reasons we're excited to get this book into people's hands. Just give me the words. I just need the words to say. And so, our intent with these powerful phrases is to really open the door to a conversation. You can't script out the entire flow of a conversation, and you don't know what the other person is going to say, but you can go in with specific intent and specific purpose behind the words you're saying. And there are a couple of these phrases where and I'm sure we can get into that, but we really have chosen the words carefully for exactly the reason that you said. This is what they'll do. And so we encourage readers of the book, please put these phrases into your own language that works for you and achieves the intent behind the phrase.
Well, let's move now into the four dimensions of constructive conflict, and let's kind of just talk about each one in turn. And that first dimension is connection. Do we know one another as human beings, which is so important in this day and age?
Yeah. So we like to think about connection at two levels. So there's the are we connected as human beings before we're even trying to have the productive conversation? And then how are you connecting at the beginning of those conversations and throughout the conversation? So, so one of our powerful phrases for connection is I really care about you and I am confident we can find a solution we can work with here. Now, imagine you're in a conflict with a coworker named Joe. Now, if Joe is like a super nice guy, he got you out of a jam the other day when your little kid was sick and he told your boss how great you are at pivot tables. Well, Joe says, I really care about you're in a conflict, but Joe says, I really care about you and I'm confident we can find a solution. You're like, yeah, Joe's a pretty good guy. I'm confident about this too. But imagine same conflict, different Joe. This is a Joe who's thrown you under the bus, and you're like, nice try, Joe, but I don't trust you. So that phrase will fall flat. So that's how like the overall relationships really matter. But then when you're there, how do you connect first? In the conversation, how do you show people that they've been heard? Another connection and go greatest of all time powerful phrase that we really like is just simply tell me more. So if somebody's coming to you really upset and your gut says, "Well, I just want to tell them why I'm right," but if you stop first and say, "Oh, wow. Can you tell me some more about that?" Now the person is going to it's going to de-escalate the conversation because they're feeling heard. They don't have to feel like they have to get louder and louder in the conversation.
I love those GOAT phrases, those greatest of all time phrases for each one of these dimensions. And thanks, Karen, for kind of bringing one forward. Tell me more is so critical, and coaching is so critical in these conversations. And what you both state in the book is that you want to clarify understanding throughout the conversation. So another one of those is it sounds like you're feeling like this, and then clarify, is that right? And thank you for letting me know how you feel because you're reflecting now to connect with that person, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. If we can start with acknowledging the emotion that we're hearing, it's such a powerful way to connect with people is to truly see where they are and what's going on and check and make sure that we've got that alignment.
Because the more connection you can build before you need it, the easier conflict becomes. And there's one more person you need to connect with, you say, and that's yourself. Because constructive conflict requires that you know your values, your goals, and what you need and what you want.
Yeah. That conversation you have with yourself really in all of these conflict conversations might be the most important because when we're reluctant to speak up for all those reasons that you mentioned earlier, uh, to ask ourselves, well, what's at stake if we stay silent? What happens if we don't say anything? Why does what I have to say matter? And to start grounding ourselves in that confidence about the value of what it is we have to say. What's possible if I speak up? One of the most important aspects of this is that if we stay silent when we have a different perspective, when we see values differently, when we're frustrated or don't understand, if we stay silent in all of that, we're actually depriving the other person of a chance to make a different choice or to respond to us differently, or for the whole group of us to grow, or for myself, if I'm staying silent, to learn something that maybe I didn't know. And so, in all of that, my silence is selfish. So, to ask myself some of those questions, to give myself the confidence and courage to speak up and why it matters.
And you're not doing yourself any favors either. I just had this experience with a guy who one of our clients has me come quarterly to do like office hours. And so any manager can come in at any time during those couple days and sit down and get some coaching. We work through strategic stuff. Well, this guy comes racing into my office. And he says, Karen, do you have that new book, Powerful Phrases for Dealing with Conflict? Because I David just sent me an email about something, and oh my gosh, I saw the book on his signature, and I need that book right now. And I was like, whoa. And I said, well, it's not out yet, but I know what it says. So let me help you. And so, anyway, he had gotten himself so fired up for the last 3 months. He had lost sleep. His wife was sick of hearing about it. He was so angry about this situation and this person. And I happened to know her. And I said, you know what? I know one thing for sure. You two want exactly the same thing. Right. And he's like, "How do you know?" I'm like, "You're gonna have to go ask her, but ask her, right?" And so he had spent 3 months of his life really just destroying himself over this thing. He went and had a conversation with her. He connected, asked her what success looked like, and he comes back and goes, "Oh my gosh, I am so relieved. I should have had that conversation 3 months ago." Right? And so, you're not doing yourself any good either if you just let things simmer and are afraid to have the conversation.
Absolutely. Now, the second dimension is clarity. Do we have a shared understanding of success, making sure we're on the same page? What are some of those GOAT phrases for this dimension of the model?
Yeah, this is clarity is one of these aspects of workplace conflict that is so common where we don't have the same understanding, or we're working at cross purposes, or I misinterpreted what you said, or vice versa. And so, one of our favorite of all of the powerful phrases in the entire book is this clarity phrase. And this is one of those that where the language really accomplishes something specific. The first goat in for clarity is, what would a successful outcome do for you? And we're very specific and intentional about saying, what would a successful outcome do for you when you're in a conversation like this? Because everybody has a purpose they're trying to serve. Maybe I want to feel good about myself. Maybe I want to feel safe. Maybe I want to look good to my boss. Maybe I want to advance my career. Maybe I want to make this customer happy. Maybe I just want to not have to work too hard. Whatever it is that I'm trying to achieve, if I don't know that, I can't come up with a solution that can work for both of us. So I need to know what that is for me, and I need to know what that is for the other person. So instead of just saying, "Hey, what is it you want?" Well, what's success look like? If we just start there, the person will just go to whatever their proposed solution is, as opposed to what the purpose behind it is. Once I know the purpose behind it, now I can help solve for both. So that's a clarity goat that we find to be very, very powerful. What would a successful solution do for you?
And if it turns out both of you want the same thing, now you can shift the conversation. But at the very least, right, this powerful question gives you insights into what the person needs, and it opens the door for you to share that definition of success with them of what you think a successful resolution would be.
Yeah. Another thing that happens in conflict conversations a lot of times is it's hard to be a good listener when you're really fired up. And so one of the clarity goats is what we call a check for understanding. What I'm hearing you say is this. Do I have that right? Again, makes the person feel heard, but also you are checking because you might have heard it wrong because you've got all these filters and lenses that you're interpreting things through.
Absolutely. This next dimension is my most difficult, and you say it's the hardest part of this framework. And that's curiosity, to be genuinely interested in other perspectives and what's possible. When you're fired up, when you're dealing with a difficult person or a tough conversation, you're oftentimes, I find, entrenched in what you want to say and not really willing to open up the door of your mind to hear what they have to say and be receptive to it.
It is so common, and I do agree with you that it is one of the biggest hurdles for all of us to get better at conflict conversations and better at collaboration is to approach things with genuine curiosity. I would say of all of these aspects, it's the one I'm continually investing in and working on in my own life. And so one of the phrases that we just love when it comes to curiosity is you just go with, I'm curious how this looks from your perspective. How does this look from your perspective? What that question, if we can get there, does a couple of things. One is if I am fired up or I am feeling that tension or things that come with those kinds of conflict situations, that's all in your amygdala. It's all in your hindbrain. Like so, when I ask a curiosity question, like, "Well, how does this look from your perspective?" I am automatically going into the front part of my brain, and it is nearly impossible to be furious and curious at the same time. So just asking a question like that will help decrease the grip of some of those intense emotions. And then, of course, the second aspect is all the learning that comes with it. And when we recognize, oh my goodness, whatever my sliver of perspective was, I had no idea of what all the other perspectives might have been. And again, now I'm in a much better situation to try to move forward and create some scenarios that can solve for both of us.
I love that. You can be furious and curious at the same time. I'm going to steal that one. So the final dimension is commitment. Do we have a clear agreement? And the one thing that really stood out to me, which I think is so key, but it's often missed, is schedule a time to review it. Many people just let it go thinking it's resolved and don't schedule that time afterward.
And that is why we have Groundhog Day conflicts, right? Because we think we've got agreement, but then we both go off and do whatever we are gonna wanted to do, and we don't. And now you've got to have the courage to have the conversation again. But if you say, "Okay, we've come up with a solution, or we've come up with at least a first step. Let's go ahead and schedule some time. Let's say 2 weeks from now, 3 o'clock on Tuesday. Talk about how this is going." Now, A, you're both looking at that calendar and know that conversation's coming up. So you're more likely to do what you said you're going to do. But also, if the person or you don't keep your commitment, then you don't have to schedule a time, have the courage to do it again. You've already got it planned. And if everything's going good, now you don't have to remember to go back and celebrate success and say thank you because you've already planned it for it. And these conversations don't need to be long.
And I think that one's so important as well when you're talking when Karen was mentioning the like if one of you didn't keep your commitment because things happen. So, if we're colleagues and we make an agreement on how we're going to get our data exchanged and get our reports to each other and so forth, and we with good intent and truthfulness and sincerity say this is how we're going to do it, fantastic. And then there's a fire drill and a customer comes in with a big issue or our manager comes in and blows things up with a bunch of things we weren't expecting if we don't have a time to talk about the fact that we didn't keep our commitment to one another, trust erodes. But with that built in time, now we have a chance to handle those exceptions and to say, yeah, we didn't do that, but it's okay because this is what happened that caused that. How can we now renew our commitment to one another or maybe solve for those kinds of fire drills in the future in a different way? It just builds in and it builds trust rather than just passively let it erode.
Absolutely. I had Michael Bungay Stanier on the program recently with his new book, How to Work with Almost Anyone. And he says the same thing. You need to be more proactive, have a question, what he calls the repair question. What are we going to do when things go wrong? Because inevitably things are going to go wrong. And if you're proactive with that approach, if you have follow up discussions around it, it's so much easier to deal with those. So no one likes to start these conversations. They aren't good in the conversations, but it's really scary for a lot to say, okay, how do I start these conversations that people want to avoid? You have a very good comment that when you speak up about something that's bothering you, it's not destructive. You're giving everyone else and you a chance to learn, grow, and respond. So silence is selfish in these moments because it steals opportunities for people to get better. That is so good.
Yeah, that for me is something that I learned early in my career, and I did not start. Listen, I wrestled with, and like, personal disclosure, like I was a conflict avoider for sure earlier in my life, and I had a situation with a CEO who was doing a marketing event, and I didn't like the way he was approaching it. It felt like it lacked integrity to me. It wasn't. I was like, I didn't like how he was communicating what was happening to the people attending, and I stewed about it. I didn't say anything because CEO, right? And as with the person that Karen described that came rushing into the office the other day, I stewed and I was frustrated and I was not sleeping and finally popped my cork. I wasn't elegant, didn't use any of the powerful phrases, and said, I can't be a part of this. This lacks integrity. And what do you think he said next? Well, I was really expecting, you don't like it, there's the door. Or let me help you pack your things, something like that. And what I got was something different. He said instead, he said, David, I don't see it that way. I don't think it lacks integrity at all. However, I don't want you to violate your integrity. And then he asked me the question that I really should have been thinking about from the beginning if I had been approaching that with the four dimensions in mind and connection, curiosity, and so forth. He said, how can we do this in a way that would work for you? It was such a simple, straightforward question and brilliant because there was a very easy answer. And it took me 15 seconds to go, "Well, what if we did this?" He said, yeah, no problem. Let's do that. All that wasted time. And if I had not said anything, I mean, I didn't say it well, and kudos to him for teaching me a better way. But that's what I learned from him is what you're saying about silence being selfish. Because if I had just stayed silent, I deprived him of the opportunity to do anything different. And I learned in that process how to be better. So even if you're not saying it well, even if you can't figure out the exact right words, you're better off having the conversation.
When you mentioned in the book too, which I love Amy Edmondson, her new book as well, but the way she states it, and you've kind of alluded to this earlier in our conversation, we often, we talk about how people are more likely to discount future benefits of speaking up and overweight their current fear. So when you ask yourself these powerful questions, you consider the future and the risks of staying silent. Like, what's preventing me from saying that? What is at stake if I stay silent? I think those are important questions to ask to get you more motivated to having these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're big fans of Amy Edmondson. She actually wrote the foreword to Courageous Cultures, the book we wrote before this one. So, yeah, very much she's doing really important work. It's psychological safety.
So, powerful phrases to invite others into the conversation. So, you've gotten up the courage to do it. Now, we want to have that conversation. So, it could be where it's a stalemate, they're not receptive, they're quiet. What are some powerful phrases that you could say to get them engaged and wanting to be a part of the conversation?
Yeah, sometimes you could just state the obvious. It strikes me that there's something really important that we're not talking about here. And I think before we go forward talking about this project anymore, can we just talk about that? Or I'm feeling that there's this topic that we really should be addressing. Maybe it's the way things are communicated, whatever it is, but just you own it first and say, I think there's something that we're not talking about, and I'd like to talk about that.
And one of my favorite kind of powerful phrase stems that you can use in opening the door to these conversations is my intent is, and just starting off with what your purpose in addressing the conversation is, and a productive, healthy intent. My intent is to help us have less tension in this process that's been driving both of our teams nuts, right? My intent is if you're a manager having to have a tough conversation with an employee about their performance, hey, my intent here is to help you succeed in your work and develop in your career. Right? What is your positive intent? Opens the door to a conversation, gives the other person a chance to come with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would even add to that, there was another guest of the podcast that said make sure that you also assume the other person has positive intent. You lose nothing by assuming that initially. You can always course correct if needed, but not only start with your positive intent, but assume they have positive intent as well. in going into these conversations.
Yeah. The thing is, most people don't wake up in the morning, brush their teeth thinking, how can I really tick off a bunch of people today? Like most of us, I mean, aren't psychopaths. We're doing the best we can with what we have from where we are. And I think, just knowing that, and I think also knowing that all the things that we were talking about at the beginning of the podcast, all the mental health challenges, all of the things that we've all been through, if behavior is coming out wonky, maybe there's something else going on. And, just having a little more sensitivity as we enter these conversations.
Absolutely. And a critical part of this too is you could say all the right words, but unless your body language is in congruence and the tone, it's not going to have the impact you're hoping for. So it's making sure to be mindful of those things as well, so that there's congruence between what you're saying verbally and those nonverbal cues and the tone in which you're saying it.
Yeah, I will never forget when David and I first started working together. So, we had just merged our businesses together. We had just gotten married, and we weren't used to each other's complete styles. And we were with a very important client. One could argue my client. So we were with a very important client, and David did something and it really ticked me off. And David's like, "You need to change the look on your face because the words coming out of your mouth are fine, but the look on your face is terrible." And he's like, "We can work through this, but first fix your face." And I was like, "Wow." And he was so right. He was so right. Yeah.
In Karen's defense, I really had screwed it up. So, I had not gone with the plan the way we discussed it, and that was on me. It was like, "Hey, listen, you're right, and we can't fix that, and you you gotta fix this right now, or we're gonna have some other issues."
Oh, that's so critical to know. And it takes other people to really sometimes recognize that in you, because it's just something that you're not even conscious of. And especially for those emotional conversations. I mean, trying to de-escalate these emotional conversations, which many of these types of difficult conversations get into. People feel disrespected when they think they haven't been heard or dismissed or devalued, right, from their perspective, or they don't think that you care about their point of view. What are some phrases that you can help them to feel less threatened and feel like they're seen and heard during that conversation, to at least get those emotions down to a manageable level?
One of the I think, this is a kind of a combination of one of those clarity, connection, check for understanding types of things, is to call attention to what it is you're noticing. I'm noticing that when you see this in the other person, I'm noticing that you're standing up and pacing and your voice is loud or whatever it is that you're noticing. I mean, it can be a lot more heated than that, but to calmly call attention to it and then follow up with what's happening for you right now. And in doing that, it kind of calls the person into reflection again. Now it's pulling them out of that reactivity into what is happening for me. Okay, what's happening for me is I'm really not feeling like you're getting what I'm saying. And that gives us a chance to then, okay, if that's how they're feeling, let me start there. What I hear you saying, please correct me where I'm wrong. So, assuming I'm going to have something wrong and I really do want to get it right, is here's what I'm hearing. So please correct me what I'm wrong, where I'm wrong. So those are a couple of examples of ways that you can start to de-escalate when those emotions are starting to key up and you're really seeing that happening.
Yeah, one of our clients was the role model for the chapter on what if your boss is a dropper of f bombs, because he was a big dropper of f bombs. And one of the things he did was what we call a mini personal experiment, and this is one of the things we teach in our courageous leadership workshop, where you pick some behavior that you want to change, or something new that you want to try that feels difficult for you because it's something that's hard for you, but it's actually not that difficult. Like it's small, and you can accomplish it in 30 days. So his mini personal experiment was, when he wanted to use the f word, he would use a silly word instead, like pickle juice. And so then he's like, this pickle juice report, or like, and it immediately, it did two things. everybody knew he was mad, right? Like they still knew that he was upset and concerned about something because he, the reason he was using these words is when he would get fired up. But it de-escalated and enabled them to have, and they're like, okay, I can tell you're really upset because you said pickle juice. So let's talk about what's going on here, right? And so now they, instead of the people just shutting down, they actually showed up more collaborative and curious.
I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.